Hey guys, welcome to the Lulu Blue Studio. If you are new here, my name is Luisa and in this channel we really like to paint botanical subjects in watercolor, sometimes also mixing different types of media. Today we are going to paint the last painting in the series, The Spring Party. For the past 4 weeks, in fact, we have painted different spring-inspired floral compositions, mainly using our watercolor paints, but also mixing different media such as colored pencils and crayons. So in today's tutorial, we are going to paint 4 different types of mini floral compositions, really mixing all of this type of media. So watercolor paints, crayons and pencils. Are you ready? Let's start painting together. For all of the 4 mini paintings in this tutorial, we are going first to lay the base of all of our flowers, and this is going to be done in watercolor. In this case, I'm using my round brush in size 6 because all of these 4 compositions are not going to be too big in size. I am mixing on my color palette a little bit of Quinacridone Purple and Cobalt Violet. I have added just a little bit of white gouache because I thought it was easier for you to watch me painting and easier for you to paint along. So I've created this type of lilac color and I am creating the petals of these first flowers. The base of the color is this lilac color, and then I'm adding some contrasting brush strokes in Quinacridone Purple while the first layer is still wet, so I'm using the wet on wet technique. The idea for this first mini painting is to create the first main flower in a bigger size and then these other small 3 flowers that are a little bit smaller in size that are sort of framing the first bigger flower. To keep everything extremely simple, at this point we are just creating the stems and small leaves for these flowers. Just mix on your color palette a little bit of green and just create with the tip of your brush these fine lines for the stems, and then for the leaves try to add a little bit more pressure to create these types of shapes. The watercolor layer of this first mini composition is completed, and although we are going to add additional layers and brush strokes with other media, in this moment we let it dry. And so we can proceed creating the first layer in watercolor for the second flower composition. And in this case I'm mixing on my color palette a little bit of transparent orange with some Scarlet Red. Using the tip of my brush, I start to create these roses from the center of the flowers, and I'm using just the tip of the brush to create some C shapes. The more I create petals in the outer part of the flower, the more I'm adding pressure with the belly of the brush to create petals that are a little bit thicker in shape. In this flower composition, we are going to create 2 types of roses. Also in this case, we want to keep everything extremely simple, and therefore these 2 roses have similar shapes and similar colors. We add a few filling flowers in small size in Cobalt Violet. We are picking this color because it's a color similar to the flowers that I have painted in first place, and therefore I'm trying to keep a little bit the same color palette, but you can just pick any color you have available. And so I am just adding these small filling flowers all around the main 2 roses that I've painted in orange color. Also in this case, the watercolor layer is just the first layer, and we are going to add additional elements and strokes with other media in a second moment. So for now, just take care of creating the main shapes of your flowers, the main 2 hero flowers and the filling flowers. Then, with the same brush, mix on your color palette a little bit of green. I like to add to the green a little bit of purple to create a little bit more of a darker green, and then just with the tip of the brush I connect the small filling flowers to the central flowers. And then with the same brush I start to create the leaves. To create these types of leaves, you can add some pressure to your brush and then release the pressure through the tip of this brush. Keep in mind to first create the half part of the leaf and then the other half, leaving the center part as an empty space, so you can see the white page underneath. Mix different types of green to have a variety of leaves that bring a little bit more movement to the whole composition. You can add different types of greens while the first layer is still wet, or you can add different types of greens in a second moment when the leaves are completely dry through the wet on dry technique. While the second composition in watercolor is drying, we start to create the first layer of the third composition in watercolor. I am mixing a similar type of purple just because I'd like to have a similar color palette for all of the mini flower compositions. And this is the most simple type of flower composition you can create, where all of these flowers are created just adding a little bit of pressure to the page with the belly of your brush. Put them in line, in a vertical line, and then with the green color of your color palette, you can create these simple stems and leaves. To create the stems, just use the tip of your brush, and for the leaves, just add a little bit of pressure to the belly of your brush. Of course, you can also create these leaves in different shapes, but for this tutorial I've decided at the moment to create these leaves in watercolor in small size, and then I will add in a second moment bigger leaves in shape and with a different shape using some colored pencils. While this third super simple flower composition dries, I notice that there is still some space to add some other little flowers. And so I've decided to add some sort of small roses, and these are created just with the tip of the brush and a little bit of orange color, creating some round or let's say C shapes, leaving some white space, some blank page that really gives the shape to these small flowers. We leave this third mini flower composition to dry, and then at this point we create our fourth flower composition in watercolor. This has a big main hero flower that we are going to paint first, mixing a little bit of orange with a little bit of purple. We leave a little bit of white space between all of the petals, and we also keep in mind to have all of these petals with different color values. This means that some petals have more concentrated amount of pigment, while other petals are a little bit lighter, so they have a little bit with the same amount, let's say, of water, less pigment. While this first layer of the petals is still wet, I'm adding some contrasting brush strokes through the wet on wet technique, adding a few brush strokes in a dark purple color. I mix also a little bit of orange, and I allow everything to dry when directly onto the paper. In this similar way, and using a similar color palette, I start to add some filling flowers all around this main flower that I've just painted. If you love painting flowers in this style, and if you would like to have access to even further details and information, you can always download for free the Beginner's Guide to Watercolor Flower Painting, which is an ebook I wrote for you, and you can download for free by clicking on the link in the description down below. You will subscribe also to my newsletter, and in this ebook I share all the best techniques, supplies. You can start your watercolor journey. This is a great integration to all of these YouTube videos that I'm sharing in this channel. While the flowers are drying, I started to create the stems and the leaves of this fourth flower composition. I mixed a little bit of green on my color palette, and for this flower composition I've decided to create two big leaves in the lower part of the composition, leaving some white space in between. Also, I'm adding a little bit of a smaller type of leaf in the upper part of the composition. I'm adding some smaller and green elements in darker green to bring some contrast to the whole composition. These types of small flower composition are a great way to start your watercolor journey, so especially if you're a beginner, I really recommend you to practice in this way. At this point, I started to add contrasting strokes using different media. Here I'm using some wax pastels, so these are some Neocolor 2 aquarelle water-soluble wax pastels. Basically these are crayons that are soluble in water. It means that if I would add some water with a brush, for example, they would behave exactly like watercolors. But if you don't have these types of pastels available, you can just use any type of colored pencil, for example, to add these contrasting strokes. Basically, with this technique and using different types of media, we want to add to our first layer of watercolor some contrasting strokes with different media to highlight the shape, for example, of the petals or of the leaves. In this case, for example, I'm taking also my colored pencil in green color, and I am adding some other leaves to the whole composition. You can create the leaves in any type, in any style. So in this case, I'm leaving some white spaces between the leaves, and I am creating these green elements just as round shapes. Some are bigger, a little bit bigger in shape, some are a little bit smaller, and I just place all of these green leaves around the flowers that I've created in watercolor. I have also decided to fill in some of these green elements just to have a little bit more of a pop of the colors. Then with a little bit of brown, I'm adding some strokes to the whole composition with the color pencil. I fill in the center of the flowers in yellow, and I've picked the crayon in yellow color because this is a very concentrated type of color and I really want the center of these flowers to really pop. You can add as many green elements or other flowers with your other media, as many as you want. And it's up to you depending on the final effect that you want to achieve. For example, in this case, I'm using this light green crayon to bring a little bit more lightness to this composition. And then when I'm satisfied, I can proceed adding details with the same crayons and color pencil to the second composition. I'm using my orange crayon just to add some contrasting strokes into the petals of these roses. Some brush strokes are made with the dark orange color and some other strokes are made with the light orange color. I really like to mix different colors and allow these strokes to really blend with the color of the petals that I've used for the base of these flowers. In the same way, using my green crayon, I am highlighting the shape of the green elements of this composition, so the shape of the leaves. I like to mix different types of greens. So when I play with media like crayons or pastels, I behave in the same way as when I paint with watercolors. In this sense, I am mixing darker values or darker colors and lighter colors in order to enhance some areas compared to others. And in this case, for example, I have created with a light green crayon some long leaves, and I am adding a little bit more lightness to this composition with small flowers in orange color that recall a little bit more the center flowers that are in a similar color. I also added a little bit of yellow, and this is really just a moment of fun where I'm playing with colors. I am just following my instinct and deciding which types of elements to add and where. So I encourage you at this point to have fun and look at what you have painted and add elements as best as you think your composition would become. At this point, I proceed adding elements to the third mini flower composition I've created. In first place, I like to add my pink crayon to just highlight better the shape of the flowers I've already painted in watercolor. Then, with a red crayon, I create further C-shapes for these little roses and basically I highlight their shape, making them a little bit bigger. I then switch to use my color pencils and I start to create big leaves with a light green color. You can really create these leaves in any shape you prefer. You can color completely the leaves in the middle, or you can leave some white spaces in the leaves that enhance the type of paper and the color of the paper that you have underneath. I really like at this point to use my color pencils and not my crayons because the kind of texture that the pencils and the crayons are laying on the paper is a little bit different. The texture of the crayons is a little bit thicker and it's much more concentrated in pigment, while in this case the effect that I wanted to achieve is to create these leaves with a sort of fine line that I can obtain with this medium. And so I spend some time now to just use different types of green that I have as color pencils and creating different type of leaves, some that are bigger in size, some that are smaller in size. I leave some leaves completely white where the paper underneath is completely visible, while I fill in some other small leaves to bring some more contrast. I thought this type of composition was a little bit dark in colors, and therefore I have decided to bring some contrast using some light type of greens that I have available to create these filler elements and these leaves. It is up to you really to decide which type of colors you want to use. My recommendation for you is really to have fun and just use what you have available, so don't stress too much in this phase of composition making. What I would suggest you is to always keep in mind that rule that I always share when I paint in watercolor, that is to have some contrasting strokes. And so you can obtain the same also when you're mixing media. So in this case, for example, the contrasting strokes are coming from the leaves that are lighter compared to the flowers in purple and red color that I've created, but also adding these small elements, these filling flowers with this light orange crayon. The techniques that you're learning when you are painting in watercolor can also be used when you are using different types of media. always look at your composition and understand where you want to add elements, or try to understand when it's time to stop. And at this point then I was quite satisfied with how this third mini flower composition ended up. So I've picked my purple crayon and I started to highlight the petals of my fourth mini flower composition. As I often say, it's up to you to decide which type of colors to use to layer your petals, for example, or to add contrasting strokes. So in general, I have to say that I like to use similar colors. In this case, for example, the colors that I used to create the base was a mixture of orange and violet. So I'm using mainly these two crayons as well to add some strokes to these petals. I first used the purple crayon and then now I am adding a few strokes using the orange crayon. But it's also very interesting sometimes to add to your petals or to your leaves some contrasting strokes with colors that have nothing to do, for example, with the petals that you have created. So my recommendation is to experiment, to play with the colors, because also mixing colors that are completely different can spark your imagination and can also help you to think differently about what you have created, or can give you some inspiration for other creations that you can prepare in the future. For the center of the flowers, I wanted to add some very little dots, and I thought that using watercolor and the brush could just give me some strokes that are a little bit too thick for what I was looking for. So I took my ink pen and just with the tip of this pen, I'm just creating some small dots and fine lines to highlight the center of these flowers. First I created the yellow base and then I added these strokes with this ink pen. I really like the effect of this combination and I encourage you to try if you want to discover this type of technique. Then I'm taking my green crayon and I am highlighting the shape of the leaves, of the bigger leaves but also of the small ones. I am also adding some light green because I really want this composition, as I did for the other three, to be a little bit lighter in the colors, and so I am just adding some small strokes that are much lighter compared to all of the other ones. What I like about mixing techniques and mixing media is that you can always improve what you have created, just adding additional strokes and additional textures to your compositions. So if you have started painting something that you are not really sure about, don't be too afraid and don't stop, but just keep painting and you will notice how you can always improve what you have painted in first place. I really hope you enjoyed painting this 5th video of this Spring Party series. Remember to check out all of the other ones, and I really hope to see you next week with a brand new video for this channel.